I'm Maria Solser. I'm an outreach specialist at the Lindner Center of Hope. And how's everybody doing? Are you staying warm and taking care of ourselves?
Yeah.
Good deal. Welcome everyone across the country and the world. We're happy to have you with us here at the Lebanon Y near Cincinnati, Ohio. As I usually do, and many of you maybe can repeat this, I always share most of the treatment services we do at the Lindner Center. So I give you a quick overview. We have inpatient treatment service for crisis stabilization. We have partial hospitalization. We also have IOP, which stands for intensive outpatient, which is for addiction and co-occurring. We have a full outpatient practice at the Lindner Center of Hope, psychiatry, psychologists, therapists, nurse practitioners. We also have a full continuum of care for eating disorders. So inpatient, partial hospitalization, intensive outpatient, and the Harold C. Schott outpatient eating disorders team. We also work with neuromodulation, which is for treatment-resistant depression. That we work with ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, and TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. We have a residential offering. We're all under one roof at the Lindner Center. We're by a big amusement park, of course, most of you here know, called Kings Island. And we're a nonprofit. We're going on 15 years next year. On one side of the house, we have a residential offering. One is called Williams House. It's a 10-day, it's where we're doing detox, medication management, and evaluation. Our other residential offering is called Sipsy House. That's where we're doing a comprehensive diagnostic assessment. We're surrounding an individual 18 and over, and we're teasing out what's going on, surrounding them with a psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker. We really want to find out and get to what is going on for the individual and provide a blueprint and also recommendation for next steps for treatment. As well, we do something called Rapid Access, which was created, it's been over a few years now. We've been at Rapid Access. It's been a great offering where a couple afternoons a week, we actually have psychiatry availability. So someone can come in 2 afternoons every week, and it's Rapid Access, so it's availability to have a psychiatrist appointment. As many people are waiting to get into psychiatry, they're having to wait, maybe weeks, months to see a psychiatrist. There's availability to make an appointment 2 afternoons a week at the Lindner Center. They'll meet with a social worker, a psychiatrist, get a screening and a plan, and if they need medication, they will receive medication. They will be able to come back for 3 bridge appointments. So they need to come back. That's available. It just will not be their ongoing psychiatrist. We want to make sure they get into a psychiatrist in the community and one that becomes available, but this is to bridge that gap, and it's called Rapid Access Service. And there's flyers on the table about that, gives you some more detail. Help yourself to all the materials. We're just so glad you're here with us tonight. If I can ever help you or any one of your family or friends regarding the treatment at Lindner or in our community, Greater Cincinnati, don't hesitate to call on me. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce Dr. Jennifer Farley, our Associate Chief of Psychological Services at the Lindner Center of Hope. And the presentation she'll be doing seasonal affective disorder. Here's Dr. Farley.
My parents are in the audience, so welcome. I'm glad to see several of you here who braved the weather this evening. It's nice to get out. It's actually a good recommendation that I will talk about later. So good for you for braving the cold and everything else and joining us here. And thank you for everybody online for joining us as well. And hopefully, as we go through this, my approach honestly is kind of professional casual. I like to lighten it up a little bit. Have some humor about a pretty serious topic though, certainly, and educate you guys. That way, if there's anything that you can walk away with, it's certainly being more aware of seasonal affective disorder, ways to recognize it, what really is it, and maybe even strategies for what to do, even if you don't technically have a diagnosis of SAD. So without further ado. So, like I said, we're going to learn about what seasonal affective disorder is. It's, when a lot of people talk about, oh, I'm depressed. Well, it helps to actually understand a little bit more about what it really means to have a clinical diagnosis of something. So I will absolutely address that this evening, as well as what the symptoms are and what the risks are, and definitely how to manage it. And we'll talk about several different strategies there. So we have to first talk about SAD being a full-blown mood disorder. So it's a depressive disorder that is a subtype of either major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder. So a subtype is just a fancy word of how we diagnose things in the DSM-5, which is our manual for all the criteria for all the different diagnoses that we have psychiatrically. So it is an actual depressive disorder, and it either can fall on the classification of major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder, but it is triggered by seasons of the year. It's usually classified as a major depressive disorder with seasonal patterns. And SAD is believed to be associated with changes in the amount of daylight during different times of the year. So I like to show this picture. So it's a beautiful picture, 9 o'clock at night in the summer. Beautiful, beautiful sunset, right? Think what I would like for all of you guys, you here present physically with us as well as online, is when you think about that picture and you think about a sunset at about 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the summer, and thinking about what feelings you may have associated with that time of day, right? A full day, most sun, hopefully that day in the summer, right? But now I want you to think about how would this change for you if you saw this and it's about 5:30 in the evening? And so it's a drastic, different kind of lifestyle when we think about sunset being at one time of the day versus definitely, significantly hours before then. So it's helpful to keep that in mind. I will probably talk about that a few times during the presentation about just the differences. Oh, it's the same time of day, but think about the differences that you may feel in yourself when the days are longer versus shorter. Here's some classic examples of this. It was interesting. The first maybe dreary, overcast day, I had to put this in there because it came up as Cleveland. And that's where I'm originally from. So typically it's rare that you would get an actual blue sky with sun between, let's say, maybe even late October to now maybe early April. So for most people with SAD, symptom onset is in the fall or the early winter, and they feel better in the spring and summer. So some people with SAD, with depressive symptoms, they have them actually in the summer, though that is less common. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, but I'm really going to focus much more on where we are with a lot of the onset with SAD, with where we're at right now in the seasons for us. And the symptoms can last 4 to 5 months per year. So again, let's focus first on major depressive disorder, because it is a clinical diagnosis, and we have to start there to understand how these then are manifested in the seasonal affective disorder pattern. So, and I want to make sure that you all know, so while these are all symptoms of depression, somebody could have a clinical diagnosis of depression and exhibit and experience a myriad of symptoms that could be different than somebody else. They will certainly overlap in some ways, but you can have different clinical presentations of it. So it's just important to keep that in mind. And not all of these symptoms are required for a diagnosis of major depressive disorder either. So certainly feeling depressed most of the day, nearly every day. Losing interest in activities that you once enjoyed. This is one of the hallmarks that I like to ask about. I work with a lot of kids and adolescents, but also young adults and adults. So through the age spectrum for me. And that's one of the big things that I talk about. And it's pretty sad when you've got even kids and adolescents who really have been active, have enjoyed things, and they just don't have interest. They don't have the energy, they just don't have the willpower, not interested. Certainly experiencing changes in appetite or weight, either increased appetite or decreased appetite. So of course, then how that affects the weight. Having problems with sleep. This could be hypersomnia or insomnia. So with sleep, it could be sleeping too much or it could be sleeping too little. Some people may fall asleep easily, but then wake up throughout the night. Some people may be like just struggle with falling asleep, and then when they finally do, then they're sleeping in till most hours of the morning. So it's really important to look at sleep patterns. Certainly feeling sluggish or agitated, having low energy, feeling hopeless or worthless, having difficulty concentrating, having frequent thoughts of death or suicide. Now, that's what is really important to know, is that that's why it's a symptom, but it's not a requirement, because there's a lot of people, even with a mild depressive disorder, who will never ever have thoughts of death or suicide, but almost, of course, always, like when I see somebody with those kinds of thoughts, there's depression involved, but we don't have to have that as a requirement, thankfully, to have the diagnosis of major depressive disorder. So when we think about winter pattern seasonal affective disorder symptoms, these are the specific additional symptoms on top of a major depressive episode. So these are typically what's much more common than with those seasonal effects. So oversleeping, so that's the hypersomnia. Overeating, particularly with a craving for carbohydrates. And so therefore you have the weight gain. Social withdrawal. So in a way, people feel like hibernating, and so they may be just staying in their homes, not really engaging. They may actually even start ordering more from not having to go out to the grocery store and having everything delivered at the home. And so they're really maybe living a very reclusive life sometimes in the winter. Certainly poor concentration and physical symptoms that are even more pronounced, such as fatigue and headaches. So specific additional symptoms may include, for summer, I wanted to mention this is summer. So for them, it may include trouble sleeping. So certainly some insomnia, so not being able to sleep as well. And poor appetite, and so these individuals actually may have more weight loss, more restlessness and agitation, irritability and or anxiety, and perhaps episodes of violent behavior. And one of the articles that I was reading about, this is not just the typical, oh, I'm so frustrated with the heat outside, I can't, like, these are individuals that are really, really agitated, irritable, and can get really, really angry. So I just wanted to make a point of this, because I'm not going to really address this in the talk tonight, because we're going to talk about the fall and winter pattern of seasonal affective disorder much more, since that's much more common. But it is thought that too much sun may contribute to summer pattern seasonal affective disorder, and it can increase melatonin and cause an imbalance of circadian rhythms. And so excessive heat can also contribute to increased anger and irritability. And while I'm going through this, as I forgot to mention, if you have any questions, especially online, feel free to put it in the chat box. I'm going to hold off on taking questions until after the presentation, because you may have a question that may eventually be addressed in the presentation. So there will be time for addressing questions after I'm done. So, as a diagnosis, so for anybody to be diagnosed either by their primary care physician, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, social worker, therapist, whomever, a diagnosis requires full remission of symptoms when the specific season ends. So there's a 4 to 5 month pattern, and you would have to have a designated time to feel that the episode has ended. And there would have to be 2 consecutive years of episodes in the same season to be effectively diagnosed. So let's talk about rates. How common is this? 4 to 6% of people in the US suffer from seasonal affective disorder. Another 10 to 20% may experience seasonal affective disorder in a much more milder form. It's more common in women than men. Some children and teens do have seasonal affective disorder, but their onset is typically not younger than 20 years old. The risk of seasonal affective disorder that decreases with age, and it is more common among those who live farther north or south of the equator. So as we get away from the equator, then that's when the risk goes up. So causes. In most of the cases, it seems to be related to a loss of sunlight in the fall and winter. That's of course, right? Researchers have found that reduced sunlight can affect the body in ways that could contribute then to seasonal affective disorder. And these are the 4 main areas. So we'll talk about serotonin levels, circadian rhythms, melatonin levels, and vitamin D. So let's talk first about serotonin. So it is a brain chemical that absolutely can affect our mood. And reduced sunlight has a relationship with serotonin, that it can cause serotonin levels to drop and then trigger depression. Circadian rhythms, so our biological clock. The decrease in sunlight can disrupt your body's natural rhythms and lead to feelings of depression. And regarding melatonin, it's a brain chemical that contributes to sleep and regulates it. That's why, if a lot of you have heard about melatonin, that's why it's recommended a lot. It's pretty safe, over the counter. And that's what basically it's just a hormone replacement to help regulate our sleep. Of course, more darkness causes the body to produce more melatonin, and more melatonin can make you feel more tired and lethargic, which are obviously then the common symptoms of depression. Regarding vitamin D levels, it's believed that this plays a role in serotonin, and much of the vitamin D that we get is from the sun. So less sunlight can lead to a deficiency in vitamin D, and then will contribute clearly to symptoms of depression. So it's helpful to look at risk factors, right? So being female, and some of the research said that being female, like females can have up to 4 times the rate of men with seasonal affective disorder. Certainly living farther from the equator. So in the United States, living farther north raises our risk. I looked at some rates of like some research, somebody had wondered, well, is there actually like a direct relationship that if you live at this latitude versus a more northern one, those people have more than this, and it's really tough and inconclusive, but it's just the farther north, it's absolutely that you do get more depression, the more the you get away from the equator. But to actually specify, well, at this longitude, like at this latitude, and all that. So living in cloudy regions, certainly, family history and genetics do play a role. One of the studies looked at, I think, 4,000 pairs of twins, whether they were fraternal or identical, and the identical twins absolutely had a higher rate of seasonal affective disorder rates among them than the fraternal. So there's a genetic risk, certainly with even family, but when there's that pure genetic risk, even among identical twins, it was higher. And then it's important to know, even just having family members with SAD, it doesn't have to be SAD, or just sometimes it's just another depressive disorder among family members that can raise the risk. So for somebody, for themselves to have a depressive disorder, so major depressive disorder or a bipolar disorder, these also can put somebody at their own risk of experiencing seasonal affective disorder, because they do worsen within the season, so much so that I have seen people who really struggle with this legitimately, whether they have a major depression or bipolar disorder, where they get extra treatment with medication during the winter months on top of what they're usually taking throughout the year. And young age, so seasonal affective disorder is more common among young adults. And there's risks of developing, and the risks of developing seasonal affective disorder decrease as you get older, which kind of honestly, when I was doing the research for this, I was kind of a little bit surprised by that one, but it's kind of nice. So how is it diagnosed? So usually people will talk to their primary care physician first. And why is that? Because they might not actually go to their primary care doc for this, but it's usually something else, right? I'm having trouble sleeping. I've gained some weight, or I've lost some weight and I can't explain it. I don't know what's going on. So usually what brings people into a primary care physician for a lot of different things is that there's other complaints of something that's affecting their daily life, right? And so that's what's helpful then for primary care physicians to really know about SAD, because they may be the frontline people to really hear about it first from their patients. So it's about discussing symptoms, thoughts and feelings, and behaviors. They may do a physical exam and or lab test to rule out other conditions that may be similar to the symptoms that somebody may have with SAD. So for example, anemia, low blood sugar, hypothyroidism, and viral infections like mononucleosis. And they may refer to a psychiatrist or psychologist who can diagnose SAD if they are not feeling very comfortable with that. So when anybody asks me, well, can we prevent this, right? Well, unfortunately, there's not much you can do to avoid getting seasonal affective disorder. Much like if there's anybody who asks me, how can I prevent a major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder? There's things that we can do to manage it, but in terms of prevention, it's really tough to be able to do that. But like I said, you can help manage symptoms to reduce the intensity of what SAD can do. And some people start their treatment for SAD before symptoms start or before the season change. So after a pattern where somebody is pretty aware, and this sometimes with younger people, and maybe the parents who are recognizing this in their kids and young adult children, because sometimes it's the family members who see these things first, but it's really that identifiable pattern to look at where the depression starts. Around, it can be October, it can be November. I look whenever I look at this with adolescents, getting away from at least the start of the school year, because sometimes kids experience more distress at the start of the school year, especially if they have struggles academically. So what's helpful where we live and looking at fall and winter, I like to separate that out from stress associated with the onset of the school year, whether it's for high school or college versus later in the fall. And I start having these conversations, honestly, with my patients about probably by mid-October. And I ask everybody, how are you doing? And I'd like to check in with them, because especially the clients that I see later in the afternoon, we can see the change of the sun and everything. And so we talk about it. It's a good way to check in with everybody as to how they're doing. Not necessarily that all my patients with whatever they have also have seasonal affective disorder, but this is also just how can we manage to prevent any symptoms from getting worse. So it's really important when people are aware of themselves and their own patterns, how to be on top of it so that they can start doing things even before the season for them starts, that they would start to feel worse. And then some may continue treatment even past the time that their symptoms would normally remit. And some, unfortunately, may just need continuous treatment. And that may be where especially somebody has seasonal affective disorder superimposed upon an already depressive disorder. So let's talk about treatment. Light therapy, we'll talk about medication, psychotherapy, vitamin D, and lifestyle changes. So I actually bought one. I bought a light therapy box. I think probably the fall, winter of 2020. So I was just I was curious anyway, and noticing some sluggishness in myself. And so I was actually gonna bring it tonight. I really have not used it as indicated, so I'll tell you about how it's actually indicated. So you can see if it really can be effective. These are, you can buy these off of Amazon, you don't need a prescription. They're actually pretty kind of cool, but they're a different kind of light. And so they've been used since the 1980s. They are designed to make up for the reduced sunlight in the fall and winter. And so it's a different kind of box, and you can just Google different, that's what I did, I put a picture on there. And they can be a circle, they can be an actual box looking thing, they can be like a wraparound light, basically, that you can easily just fold up and take to work. So there's lots of different ones, lots of different prices, lots of different whatever, but you can find some, I think, on even online for like $20, $25. So the box emits a bright light that mimics natural sunlight at 10,000 lux. And this is about 20 times brighter than a regular indoor light. And it affects the neurochemicals that regulate mood. And it's used daily in the morning, typically between 20 to 60 minutes. And the amount of time depends on the strength of the light. And so these are some indications for, well, what the heck, like how do we actually use this? So whenever I've worked with people who have already done their homework and they have already bought a light box for themselves, whether their physician, their family physician recommended it or whatever, usually there's people will actually put the light out at the breakfast table. And so they will drink their coffee, engage in breakfast, talk with their family members, or if they're going to be scrolling, I was going to read the newspaper, but it's hard to find people who actually get the newspaper anymore. But if they're scrolling the internet, if they're scrolling their phones or anything, they will sit at the table, usually in the morning, for 20 to 60 minutes or so. One does not look directly in the light, so you're not facing it, you're not looking at it directly. It's present there, and it's not direct. So you would place the lamp about 2 to 3 feet away, again, while you eat, read, work, or do other activities. So some people with whom I see, especially adults, they will actually they will keep it at their office. And so they might when they get to the office, they may have just an hour of paperwork or whatever at their desk, and then they may just sit at their desk with the light there. And so the timing of use can certainly impact the effectiveness of using a light box. The morning light therapy seems to work best because using later in the day can affect insomnia. And results can be seen in 2 or 4 days with consistent use, but it can take about 2 weeks to reach its full benefit. So it's one of those things that if you want to try it, don't expect after 1 or 2 days that it's going to feel, significantly different. It's like sometimes medication, even though it is shorter acting medication, sometimes medication, when going on, it takes about a good 4 to 6 weeks or so to get to a therapeutic dose. At least this is 2 weeks. So, but it is but the importance with that is that it's important to be consistent with it. It was interesting. I learned about a light visor. So even besides a light box, there's a light visor out there that instead of a box, one just wears a visor that emits light. So instead of on the side or indirect, then it comes from the visor. And some people even use a dawn simulator where the light turns on early in the morning in one's bedroom. And then it mimics a natural sunrise and it gradually increases in brightness. Kind of fun. So if light therapy helps, it's used until enough sunlight returns during the season, sometime in the spring. But stopping light therapy too soon can result in a return or worsening of symptoms. So that's why with the light box, it really is, when somebody knows they have SAD, seasonal affective disorder, it really is just a commitment to being just using it and not giving up on it and just maybe sometimes even having it to travel with them, just so that they don't discontinue use to make up then for, getting back on schedule to use it again. And what's nice about it is that when it is used properly, there are very few side effects. But it's important to know what are the possible side effects of using the light box is eye strain, headache, fatigue, irritability, and insomnia. Now, thankfully, these are small side, like they're low, but it's important to know that those side effects can be present. So certainly, even other indications for a light box would be to start light therapy after you've talked with your doctor, if you have bipolar disorder. And the reason with bipolar disorder is actually the light may actually activate one's mood into a hypomania or manic state, if they're so sensitive to those light states. Certainly skin that is sensitive to sunlight, and a condition that makes your eyes vulnerable to sunlight damage. All these are the warnings to basically talk about with your physician first. And it's really important. I remember however many years ago, I go to the tanning bed to feel better in the winter. Do not use a tanning bed, right? Do not use tanning beds are not indicated for treatment of seasonal affective disorder. The high UV rays can certainly can harm one's eyes and skin and cause skin cancer. So I would never recommend that here. So let's talk about medication. It can be recommended for symptoms that are certainly more intense or severe. Mild cases of SAD, usually people try to prefer some of the other techniques that we'll talk about in a little bit, especially when I talk about the psychotherapeutic strategies and what people do in therapy or talk about those kinds of things. But for certainly, like I'm not comfortable if I know that I'm working with somebody who's pretty severe, especially when they have thoughts that are dark, that even if they don't want to commit suicide or have those urges, but they have thoughts of just helplessness, hopelessness, not wanting to be active, not wanting to get out of bed. This is pretty severe. And that's when I try to get a doctor involved. And that's where the SSRIs can be helpful in treating depression. And so therefore they're helpful with treating seasonal affective disorder. It was interesting. I learned even from doing this presentation that Wellbutrin, bupropion, may actually prevent the recurrence of seasonal affective disorder with its use. And it is currently the only pharmacotherapy labeled specifically for seasonal affective disorder. Now, does that mean that that's the only medication that should be tried? No, because Wellbutrin is not an SSRI. So the SSRIs you would hear Prozac, right? Lexapro, those kinds of drugs are classic SSRIs. They're safe. There's some indications, but that's when people talk with their doctors about it, as to just looking at side effects, making sure that that is the correct diagnosis before any medication is certainly treated and used. So let's talk about vitamin D. What's interesting, so the research on vitamin D supplementation for helping the symptoms of seasonal affective disorder, it's mixed. And some may prefer to use this, at least to try it, prior to trying some kind of more, fully psychiatric medication. So we should talk about lifestyle changes. This is where some of the fun stuff comes in. So let as much natural light into your home or office. Open the blinds, sit close to windows, and keep your environment bright. Let the light shine, right? Remind your brain and your eyes and your body of that there is light outside. I had somebody work with somebody yesterday, they did sometime this week, and they said how dark it gets when it snows. And then she laughed with me because I'm like, well, me from Cleveland, I'm familiar with snow on the ground. And I'm like, well, at least when there's snow on the ground, it's actually pretty bright outside. But it can actually then bring a lot of dreariness for people when they see the snow. It's too cold. It's too problematic for me to go out. I don't want to deal with it. I'd rather be inside. So even when it's dreary, even if it's cloudy, it's really important to open the blinds, let as much natural light shine in. Certainly get outside when possible, even when it's cold or cloudy. Ecotherapy, just getting out in the environment, we know has a great effect on our mood in a really positive way. And so even in spite of ourselves for not wanting to maybe get out and be in the cold, it really can be really helpful, even just for a slight brisk walk to get out in that natural air. Keeping physically active is really, really important. We also know this even from the research with treating depression, even anxiety, just any kind of mood disorder, that we know that exercise, it has wonderful benefits, and oftentimes in some studies have actually shown that exercise is just as effective with treating depression as medications. So that's why it's just so important to stay physically active, because the exercise and the activity boost the endorphins in our brains, and they relieve stress. So one of the things that I also talk about is elongating one's waking hours by doing something out of the home in the evening. And so one of the recommendations actually talked about how some people know their pattern of SAD so clearly that they actually they plan for their calendars to get busier in the winter so that they feel like they're doing more, to be holding themselves accountable, getting out of the house, committing, whether it's volunteering, whether it's just doing something purely fun, whatever it would be, but staying a little bit more active during those times. One of the points that I like to make is reminding us that, imagine going back to, let's say, 7 o'clock in July, and think about where the sun is. It's still bright, we still have at least a couple hours or so until the sun sets, right? But then in 7 o'clock now feels very, very different, and yet it's the same time of day. We don't hopefully go to bed earlier, so much earlier, just because the sun goes down earlier. So it's important to just keep in mind, well, how can I remind myself and my body that I still don't go to bed until, let's say, 10 o'clock, 10:30, 11, whatever somebody's regular timing is, because that's what's really important, is that one's schedule of wake time, sleep time still remains consistent no matter the season. So that we don't have people going to bed at like 9 o'clock, 8:30, 7 o'clock, when typically their natural bodies would actually have them go to bed 10 o'clock, 10:30, 11. So when we talk about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, so if we think about cognitive behavioral therapy, what is it really? It's really looking at how one's emotions affect how you think, how you behave. So I'm gonna use an example. When I usually tell people in my first session, whenever I do a clinical interview, I talk about the effects of anxiety, depression, and I actually have, it's kind of fun, I have all these different scarves in my office, and I put it over my head, or even before the scarves. When I grew up with my brother, when he hit puberty, he was like this giant compared to me, and he would put his hand on my head, and he could easily, because he was so strong, he could easily just move me around and guide me around the house. And I laugh about that, because that's exactly, though, the effect of what a really powerful, intense emotion will do. It will guide you to think and do things that will make that emotion stay or become more intense. It's that powerful, right? So it's important then to look at, well, what is that mood state? When you're in that kind of mood state, what are the things that you tell yourself? And what are the things that you do? Even boredom, when people get too bored, they get too understimulated, too underwhelmed. And even that can be a risk for depression, because if you think about your body state when it's bored, or when it's too relaxed or understimulated, right? It may actually mimic what your body would be doing if it was naturally depressed. And so you may be misinterpreting, well, this is boredom, but it's not depression. But you maybe actually think that, well, I'm depressed, which may very well be the case, but it's important to look at how we behaviorally engage in our lives that may feed depression and may keep it going. So in terms of the thoughts related to cognitive behavioral therapy, it focuses on replacing negative thoughts about winter and more positive thoughts. And I'll give you guys a little bit of taste of that today. Behavioral activation. So this is when we identify and schedule pleasant, engaging indoor and outdoor activities. So one of the things, I'm also a dialectical behavioral therapist. I'm just aware of like so many great skills that I teach, especially my adolescents, because I run an adolescent group. But one of the things that I teach them is you may have a Monday that looks exactly like the Tuesday. And at the end of those days, you may have said that those were both really good days. That you may have done the very same positive things, but on Monday, they happen spontaneously, serendipitously, if you will. So you weren't planning them out, but you had a really nice day when you reflected on all the positive things that happened, but you didn't plan them. But Tuesday, you did plan them. And so maybe you took the experiences on Monday and you said, I'm going to build this into my schedule. Well, now by planning it, now we have more psychological benefits because now we feel we're not as helpless. We can plan. Helplessness and planning are inversely affected, right? So when people are depressed and they feel helpless, when they actually can plan for something positive, now they're doing something to combat what that depression is telling them not to do, right? But they can trump it. So it's being aware. The other thing is that now it brings out more positive emotions because now we're looking forward to something. Whenever I work with anybody, whether they're at school, whether they're at work, I'm like, you've got 2 parts of your day. How do you plan part 2 of your day? It's only 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I can understand that you had a really crummy day, but now when you're done meeting with me, what's your plan for the next part of your day? And so it gives them opportunities to actually plan and look forward to something. Sometimes people need an anchor for the evening time to get them through the day, right? And so it's that looking forward to something and knowing that they can actually schedule something and plan and be proactive in their own lives. That now it builds empowerment, it builds that helpful feeling for themselves. Again, it's a matter of looking forward to something. Really does something psychologically for us in a really great way. Mindfulness practice, focus on being in the moment. You know, it was really fun because I saw at the table, Jen and Maria had there's a gratitude handout. And if you have not picked one up here, for those of you here, I would highly recommend that you go grab one. I am big on mindfulness. So mindfulness is basically thinking and being in the moment. I usually play a movie clip about this, but if you focus too much on the future, it can actually bring about anxiety, like thinking about what if this happens? What if I can't do this, right? What ifs, by the way, are not our friends. I don't know a lot of people who actually ask what ifs in a good way. Like, what if I have a great day? What if I win the lottery? What if I go to work and it's the best day of work possible and everything else? We usually don't focus on what ifs in the positive direction. It's usually the negative, right? And that's when if we focus too much on the future, especially with those what if questions. And then if we focus too much on the past, sometimes we risk maybe having regret, being sad, right? So being mindful in the moment is taking stock in this moment. And what helps is actually having a gratitude journal. So even on the crummiest of days, can I be grateful for something? And it may be just, I'm grateful that I had a hot meal today. And if that's what you're grateful for, then so be it. Sometimes it's the little things, right? Sometimes people don't have the big victories that they think that they really can be grateful for, but it's a matter of just taking stock in what they have. And so being mindful in the current moment, it means if you're going to, so some of the things that we practice this, if you're going to take a brisk walk, then focus on your walk. If you're going to watch television, put all the other electronics away and focus on the television show. If you're going to eat dinner with your family, focus on the conversations at the table and put other things away, right? It's focusing on one thing in the here and now. And so we practice this sometimes by being mindful about what we eat. So if you ever really sat with a strawberry and mindfully looked at it and then started eating it, and we're really, really aware of what the texture, the taste, the temperature of something like a strawberry is. That's an example of mindfulness practice, right? Sometimes it's just focusing on your breathing. There's all these different techniques for mindfulness, but what I usually do with the seasons is how can we be mindful in the moment, just this moment, instead of thinking, oh, great, like this time change, I won't see the sun until several months from now. It's like, well, let's focus on the here and now. Radical acceptance is also helpful. And radical acceptance is we accept something, but we don't have to love it. We accept something, we don't have to like it. But we're not focused on fighting it. And so radical acceptance is radically being open to accepting whatever it is that I cannot control. So an example that we use, especially from dialectical behavioral therapy, is thinking about a riptide. And then for anybody who's ever learned about riptides, been in a riptide, like one of the highest recommendation is if you get stuck in one, what are we supposed to do? Not fight it. That's when people risk drowning. But what are we supposed to do? Go along with it, even though it goes against our very nature, because we so badly want to control and we want this to do better. We want to combat this. I can overcome this. I'm a human, and this is just a wave. And then when you radically accept the situation, then you can actually be more empowered because you know what to do. You just go along with the wave, right? And then when it kicks you out, then you can course correct. And that is far more empowering when you've chosen, when you've seen what that experience is, and when you know what to do about it, then you can, now you're empowered enough to overcome it, instead of just trying to fight it and fight it and fight it and fight it. So this is when I call it like leaning in. So if we radically accept this is fall, almost winter, how can we lean into it? And maybe see opportunities of the season that are different than the experiences that we would have in the summertime. I know there's a friend of mine from high school who lives in Florida, and so sometimes I see her posts of everything in Florida, but she misses the fall leaves of Ohio. And so much so that sometimes like she's taken a couple trips back up here, but it's like a matter of thinking about, well, in order to have the winter, it does bring out these different seasons of the year that we are grateful to have because of it. So radical acceptance, right? How can we radically accept and do some experiences, especially this time of year? Well, certainly football. And if you think about the culture of football in the United States, love it or hate it, right? It's at least a social experience that gets people together, whether in their homes, out in restaurants, or outside, right, at stadiums. And it's entertainment, right? And it's only this time of year. Certainly going to pumpkin patches, embracing all that, those kinds of activities when the weather is nice, like we had, this Ohio was actually, this fall was pretty, in particular, like really nice because we didn't get a lot of rainy weekends. But then embracing winter, skiing, sled riding, there's things that by having winter, it does offer. My kids are still hoping for a white Christmas. After the snowflakes lately, we might get it, but I don't want to ever squash their hopes. Cleveland would be a better thing, but we're not going back up to Cleveland for Christmas. But it's leaning into the beauty of what winter can offer. Getting lost in a cabin, let's say, and going and having a retreat and just being cozy. So it's funny. I put this up here because how many of you have noticed even more Halloween lights the past few years going out outdoors? There's a lot more people who are decorating their homes. They're not waiting until Christmas. I call that radically accepting the season. Because if we we can't put lights out on our houses for 4th of July. There'd be only a small slight window to really enjoy house lights in the summertime, right? That's what we have fireworks for. But it's nice outside, we can elongate our days, right? But I don't know, I've had some fun lately thinking about all the fun things that are now being sold as outdoor decorations for Halloween. And I believe that it's a prelude of what's coming certainly for Christmas time, but for those of us who do celebrate Christmas, but that is a way to radically accept and maybe enjoy some of the things that we can do because there's less sunlight. When you think about this scene, right? There's a lot of people I already know who have put up their Christmas trees or will be soon. Some people still hold off for Thanksgiving, but again, for those of us who do celebrate Christmas. But I want you guys to keep this scene in mind, since we know that for many around here, this scene will soon be coming, and that's related to something I'm going to be talking about soon. But we're bringing the light indoors, even though it's not natural light. It's still cozy light. And then we can have a little bit more humor with those 12-foot skeletons from a store that have been popping up places. Now people are using humor, keeping them outside. They're darn expensive. I don't have one, but they're really funny. And then I saw this and I was like, well, that's brilliant. A skeleton like putting up Christmas lights on a house. So it's being creative and really leaning into, all right, we have less daylight. What can we do with it and have a little bit of fun? So managing seasonal affective disorder. So how many of you have heard of Hygge? I love Hygge. I love Hygge. We're going to talk about Hygge. I hope I have a friend who's online tonight. She's a dear friend. She's a psychologist I trained with. She's in New York, and she posted this on social media about Hygge. I think it was like in 2016. It was a New York Times article. And I was so intrigued by it because it just seemed to naturally reflect some of the things I typically do anyway during the winter time. The lifestyles, again, naturally, because we all live here, they're very different, in the summer versus the winter. And so Hygge is a Danish word. It means a quality of coziness and comfortable conviviality that engenders a feeling of contentment or well-being. Another definition was taking pleasure in the presence of gentle, soothing things. How lovely. And that is radical acceptance, right? Conviviality, by the way, I had to look it up. My husband says, well, what does that mean? I'm like, I don't know, let me Google it. It's friendliness. And so it can be done by yourself. But what's really kind of cool is that these are individuals who embrace Hygge during the winter months with other people. And it's friendly, it's easy, it's just nice, and it's pleasant. It might be playing games, it might be just easy, really gentle conversation. And so it's about applying mindfulness and radical acceptance, by the way. That you're accepting that this is the winter and we're going to hibernate and be cozy for a little. But you're applying mindfulness to things that are soothing. A cup of coffee. Cashmere socks. Or wool socks if you're okay with the texture. Soft sweaters. Even candles and warm fireplaces. So like I said, this can be done alone. You can be wrapped in a flannel blanket with a cup of tea and a book. It doesn't have to be at night. I'm going to just have it cozy on the pictures. This can be easily during the daytime. Having those simple, easy waking hours. I kind of like, as a mom, I kind of enjoy my Saturday mornings when I can wake up and the house is quiet. And I can wrap up in my chair. I even bring out winter blankets. There's textures that are associated with Hygge. So you may have chunkier blankets, not the light blankets that you might have as a throw in the summer. So these are just heavier, but certainly soothing. So it can be in the daytime, nighttime, it's embracing that cozy atmosphere. And so in the true expression of hygge, it involves joining with loved ones in a really relaxed, intimate atmosphere. So this is when families can just be present and maybe watching a movie together or enjoying some kind of meal together. It's being with others too. And it's fun, Danish doctors actually recommend tea and hygge for the common cold. So how do we manage seasonal affective disorder? So certainly following your treatment plan with appointments, taking medication if it is prescribed, and certainly having the consistency with doing so. A big one is taking care of our bodies, right? Eating healthy, getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, being aware of what's good for us, and still keeping up with that, even when we might not have the energy to do it. That's also called opposite action. So opposite action is, I don't really want to go. I know that I have fun with my friends, but it feels so, I don't know if I have the energy to go and be social, right? Opposite action is, well, unless there's really a legitimate concern about going out, it's about radically accepting that, okay, I might not be in the best mood, but I know that if I go and socialize in an easy manner with my friends, I know by the end of the night, I will feel better than what I would have if I completely avoided it and stayed home. So that's opposite. Certainly exercise. Coping ahead, having a plan. Know what to do when your symptoms worsen and watch for early signs and take action. So this is when people get to be the experts in themselves. What is good for you? What is good for what can be helpful to manage during the fall and winter? And certainly don't turn to alcohol or drugs because it's not good to self-medicate through experiences anyway, but what we know is that these can worsen depression. It can actually, by one's desire to escape the feeling of being depressed, they can actually cause themselves to feel more depressed by using drugs or alcohol. And certainly we do know that alcohol can absolutely interact with medication in really negative ways. Managing stress. So being able to recognize, is there something also going on in my life currently that is adding more stress than typical? And that's where therapy can be helpful. When somebody is like, I'm working through being in my job or my marriage, my family, circumstances with friends, or I'm just feeling low. It's a matter of trying to manage that better, maybe even problem solve ways to make that better for people. Certainly isolating oneself. We've heard from COVID, right? There were certain people who absolutely thrived. The introverts, people who really don't, or like people who get socially anxious really thrived more during COVID. And then they struggled a lot more when the world reopened. Between kids, adolescents, college students, adults, it didn't matter, right? Those individuals, like I think everybody in some kind of way struggled in whatever personal way to reintegrate. But those individuals who really knew why it's so valuable to be connected with others. I actually see more adolescents now who absolutely prefer to be seen in person than online. It reminds them too much of school. They would rather have the connection of human connection, physically present with somebody else, which is a really wonderful sign. We really got to learn the value of being connected in person with other people. So isolation is just not good. It just feeds the depression. Like I said, planning ahead, actually having a plan psychologically has many more benefits that are positive. Some people may purposely plan to be busier, like I said earlier, during the time that they normally feel down. So sometimes people might specifically join a bowling league or specifically join a book club during the winter months, or just to make sure that they're going more, they're attending more of those kinds of meetings during the fall and the winter, just to hold themselves accountable to make sure that they're getting out. One of the things that I usually tell people is, now imagine walking in Meijer, Walmart, Target, away from the front of the store. 8 o'clock in the morning looks and feels the same as 11 o'clock, as 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 7 o'clock in the evening, maybe even 10 o'clock in the evening, or even 1 a.m. should you choose, right, to shop. What's helpful to remember is that when you're away from the front of the windows where you don't, like, you can't see how dark or light it is outside, going somewhere like that, it elongates your day, right? And reminding yourself it's 7 o'clock in the evening, I'm gonna get out, I'm gonna go to the grocery store. Because that's still part 2 of our day. So just because it's fall and winter doesn't mean we come home from work and we have to put on our pajamas and then just isolate for the rest of the night. Now, is that okay to do? Yes, but if that is the pattern, then people might become at risk of experiencing worse mood because they're isolating and not really engaging in that part 2 of their day. So again, it helps to have that accountability of signing up for things, being creative for things, to prevent that hiding out at home. And certainly taking a trip, thinking about a trip, planning a trip, but certainly to a warmer, sunnier climate during the winter can absolutely be helpful. And like I said before, so it's like the advantages of planning something, because again, when we plan something, we are empowered, we get to make choices, we get to choose to overcome something or choose to look forward to something. And there was an article a few years ago that I read about regarding vacationing, that while it's wonderful to vacation, and that's why, like, for some people, for the people who do enjoy traveling, that of course the travel is a value and they are excited about their travel when they get to whatever destination. But if we think about when we actually plan vacations, it's the planning that is really the psychological benefit, because now we're looking forward to something. Okay. If you think about it like that, I laugh, like the day after Christmas, that we call the cruise commercial start, right? Yeah. And so some really wonderful resources about seasonal affective disorder, both nationally as well as locally. So NAMI has a chapter here in Southwest Ohio, and it's really, man, I mean, they're just wonderful. They provide a lot of advocacy, support for people with mental illness, as well as the family members of mental illness. And there's a lot of great information on NAMI's website about seasonal affective disorder, even just depression, anxiety, whatever disorder you would want to know more of. A lot of these have that information. But these are resources, especially that also have particular information on seasonal affective disorder. And like I said, NAMI's Southwest chapter is really active and wonderful. They do a lot of really great work around here. The National Institute of Mental Health is another, and the Mayo Clinic, American Academy of Family Physicians, and then Cleveland Clinic. These are all, like, when I did some researching and information gathering beyond some of the articles that I was looking at, these were the big ones that came up as helpful resources online for looking at information on seasonal affective disorder. Okay. And those are some of the resources that I used. And I will point out that the New Yorker article on Hygge is there. Just a fun article, like I said, about just explaining why people, you know, in Scandinavian countries who have such little daylight in the winter can be such happy people. And that part of it is applying that to here. So I realize I'm a little early, which means we have more time to take questions. So what we're going to do first is take questions. If anybody has questions here physically, and then if there was any questions that came up from the chat box, I can answer any of those. Does anybody here first have any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so
You repeat.
So, yes, sure. So let me make sure that I got it right. So are there any local support groups for anybody here with seasonal depression? Yes. I believe the I would imagine there would be, but that's why, so with NAMI, they have a lot of support groups, in the area. There's definitely, support groups for a lot of different things here. But NAMI has like peer-to-peer support groups. And so with those, more individuals with seasonal affective disorder would be attending those. If we just even look at the seasonal pattern of it more in the wintertime. Yeah, but definitely to look for resources for support groups, I would definitely look up like the local chapters of those national organizations here. NAMI, like I said, is just a wonderful asset here. Anyone else have any questions here? Okay, Bob, do we have any questions from them?
We do. One question that is asked in the chat is, if you know, has anyone used a therapy light visor that you talked about? Because he likes the ability to move around as opposed to like sitting by the light.
So the question was about anybody that maybe with whom I've worked personally has talked about the benefits of light visor. I have not. Honestly, that was the first time I had learned about a light visor doing, the research for this presentation. So I don't know anybody yet. Though I can totally appreciate just the functionality of being able to walk around with it instead of trying to walk around with a light bulb battery light box or something. So I'm sorry, I can't help out with that one, but.
So I guess that goes hand in hand with this also from the same person. They want to know, is it more important to have the light like on your face or just on your skin, on your?
So a really good question. Yes. So in terms of light box, it's with the face especially, but it's indirect. So you would not really be looking directly into the light. You would have it present, almost sitting at the table with you, but shining towards your face. Not really towards any other particular part of the body. It's just at the table, just sitting it out on the table, plugging it in, and having it be indirect light on your face. Yes.
Then someone else asked, and I don't know if they would know that or have looked it up, is light therapy, when you showed some of those examples, it was like a box
Yeah.
with a circle, and they want to know if does it come like in a ball? Did you like you put on a light overhead?
That's a good question. I don't know. So the question was, let me go back to it. So the examples of different kinds of light boxes, I guess the question was like if it comes like in a bowl, like a
bulb,
oh, a bulb. There we go.
right? So you,
And I don't know. The thing is with that is that if it becomes more overhead, then it's even more indirect light towards the face. So I would wonder about maybe that might be a possibility of maybe why they might not make actual bulbs, but like to have overhead, but something to consider. I didn't find that on the research though.
gotcha. Double check that.
We do have somebody here. Yeah.
There is a lamp, kind of like a floor lamp, gooseneck. And I have that sitting at the end of my table. And while I'm doing my work, business work, paying bills, writing letters, sending cards. That light is here with me. And it really does, it's a good light, it's not like a lamp. It is on the floor and on one loose there. You can
Okay.
move it around. And I would think that if you were reading, if you were a reader, that having it close to you and not looking at it,
Right.
but having it close to you, because it's a different kind of light.
Right, so and what you have is it's basically a light box. It's not the box, but is it specifically for seasonal affective disorder? Or it's not? Okay,
They did have advertised something that helps with this slow light.
Yeah.
Seasonal affective disorder.
Yeah. So that's, so one of what, so somebody here is talking about how, there's a, like I said, it's a floor lamp, it's a floor lamp, but it's bendable, and so somebody,
But it is like just straight up shade up.
right, not a typical lamp.
No.
That's bendable, so somebody, like, if there was like, let's say, a bulb or something, I would imagine though, there would have to be like a,
You can get bulbs. replacement
Right,
bulbs for
right.
these lamps. I would bet if you went to rather than electric. Talk to them about that kind of bulb.
mhm.
Or these lamps.
Right. The trick will with the light is that there would have to be, there's usually a screen that protects our skin from the UV rays from the light box, but
It's not like they're. You lay under heat lamp.
mhm. So it's not, yeah, it's not a heat lamp, but it's just a really nice kind of light. Mhm.
But I would think if anybody's interested in it, to go down to Lebanon Electric and talk to them about the concept. They might know about it, and I would think that if I needed to buy a light bulb, it's hard to go to find it.
Right. So to at least ask somebody who knows about electric light bulbs to see if that would be a possibility. Yeah.
Comment two things. One, when I lived in Seattle, it got a lot of rain and darkness. It was interesting that, business I worked in, it was all about the lighting. They had special lighting that apparently supported, the rain, I guess.
Yeah.
And I didn't research it too much. I lived there a couple of years, but I do remember there was some special lighting.
Interesting.
Very interesting because of all the darkness from the rain.
Right.
But on another note, I wanted to ask you this, do you know if we see change in the brain with, SAD? Like we might with other types of,
What's really tough is that then that goes into an area where and if we saw changes in the brain with people who are depressed versus non-depressed or anxious. And I think if that were the case, we'd be having people have MRIs to diagnose psychiatric conditions, and we just don't do that. Like, it'd be nice if we could to get that kind of information. I mean, what I do know, what I'm going to talk about is this is where my research in ADHD and depression kind of overlap. What I do know is, let's say if somebody is with their executive functioning, if they are so in tune to, let's say, video games, electronics, phones, and whatnot, right? So let me use that example. So let's maybe take somebody who's depressed and just checked out, right? Checked out and just playing video games and like that's their. They're just spending an excessive amount of time. It was really fun to learn about this. I went to a neuropsychology conference a few years ago. And they had the keynote speaker who actually was on a Dateline 2020 report about looking at the effects on the brain of people who, especially in this case, it was like adolescents with ADHD who were really addicted to electronics. And what they found is that they had short tempers, they were irritable, they acted depressed. They didn't really have any interest in being in doing other things. Just basically got sucked into their phones, video games, whatever it would be. And they found when they did some imaging scans that their frontal lobes were not lighting up. These kids then went to summer camp for a few weeks, no electronics. They came back, did the studies, did the research, the imaging showed now their frontal lobes were online. So I want to at least speak to that part because I think that that's really important, because some people might hibernate and then kind of check out on, if it's playing a video game, playing on their phone and whatnot. Not any of those things are problematic. It's a matter of the use of them, and that our brains are just not wired to be wired like that, right? So when we talk about ecotherapy, when we talk about getting out in the environment, it's about giving our brains a rest and feeding our frontal lobes. Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. Yeah, thank you. But I wanted to get back to something because I was up here looking at my phone because there was something that I looked at. I was wondering about some just added things to talk about. So Maria was talking about when I mentioned to everybody who couldn't hear. So she lived in Seattle for a couple of years and noticed that definitely like the lighting was different where you worked. And so I looked up, like, well, what states, if we're talking about the United States, right? What states have the highest depressive rates, especially if we're talking about seasonal affective disorder? So I was wondering if anybody was gonna ask, well, where should I move to, right? So Hawaii has the lowest rate of depression, apparently, as well as California and New Jersey. But no surprise for the states with the highest amount of depression, think cloudy. So definitely Oregon, West Virginia, and Maine. Just a little extra to this. Anybody else from online?
They do, Doctor. Excuse me. One of the questions they have in there is that, they know that SAD patients do better when they use the therapies, but if they're like just starting, like which one, like start with the light?
Yeah,
Start
so
with
sure. So it's like wondering if you actually have a disorder, or maybe you have a mild form of it, or just want to feel a little bit better in the wintertime. You can buy a light on, you can buy a light online without a prescription. You may have had to need a prescription years ago, but you don't need a prescription anymore for light therapy. Melatonin, same thing, you don't need that, that's over the counter. But I want to at least address that I'm a psychologist and I do not have my I don't prescribe medication, and I always recommend that people, it's just wise to talk with your doctor first. I just think that that's good medicine, no matter what you're going to be doing. If you're going to be introducing a new herb, right? If you're going to be introducing anything, it's just really good to talk with your doctors just to make sure that you don't have a condition that might counteract that or anything like that. So it's just wise medicine, but there are things absolutely out there to try that you do not need a prescription for. But it might be one of those things you might want to try it, buy it, but even call your physician just to let them know. Yeah.
double check, but I think that was the questions that were online.
Double checking.
Don't see any others.
And then
Do you work with the VA at all?
do I work at the VA? No, I did some training at, well, no, not at a VA, at a military base, but not the VA. But
What kind of guidance would you give the veteran community
Mm.
who is dealing and trying to navigate very tight spaces between diagnosis? To diagnose someone as depressed, like these things affect their ability to collect disability or their appeal process or for medical discharges. But this is a good way, maybe for some preventative care, but what kind of guidance would you offer in this regard?
yeah, that's a really good question. So especially when working with veterans, like in terms of disability and the services that they may get. It's a matter of it's gosh, with veterans, it can be so complex because if they're already in the system and they're usually hopefully getting help for other things already. I think just a lot of education. When I did my training, I did work at I was really impressed by the support groups. When I did the Hampton Roads VA for my training, about the community there and even the types of different groups for veterans, like from this war versus this war, but a lot of education and a lot of normalizing to make it clear that this is a thing for people that they can talk about, ask about, even with their doctors, because there's so many that might not even think enough about this to wonder. And so sometimes it's wonderful, right? If people, including veterans, can even be proactive to realize that this is going on, but they might not be aware of it. But hopefully the people, in the treatment, their clinicians are actually, that they're asking questions enough how active are you? What are you doing? We just know there's a lot of veterans out there also with PTSD, and so hopefully that there's a lot of discussions about what is their lifestyle, what are you doing, how are you engaging, that kind of thing.
Thank you. I have, I'm doing some volunteer work with the population in Alaska specifically. And previously, my experience volunteering was in Hawaii, and these are very, very different, like, it's extremely complex. And I'm just a volunteer, I'm not a medical practitioner, so trying to navigate what recommendation can I make that is, it's not an official recommendation, of course, but where can I point them? So I have several watching, so thank you for.
Oh,
for
that's
your time
lovely.
and answering.
That's lovely. So we have a volunteer who helps, so you've done work in Hawaii as well as, and now Alaska.
Yes,
Yeah, was specifically with veterans.
yes.
So just trying to educate and have them be aware and be proactive, even for their own right to do some things, but also even to engage with their treatment team. If it's significant enough, especially, even if it's mild enough, it's just nice to let your physician know. I think education is always key, even just education in terms of posters around the VA hospitals or, emails, anything like that. Yeah, it's tough. Thank you for what you're doing. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Farley.